Selections are absolutely essential for anyone using Photoshop. Let's start with the first of two selection tools that we'll cover in this video. The rectangular marquee tool, and you'll see the letter M on your keyboard will jump you to that tool if you're a keyboard shortcut fanatic like I am. With the rectangular marquee tool, I'm going to start by clicking and dragging over this little sign that says curb your dog. I'd love to use this image as a background for what we're going to do, but the sign is distracting. So let's use the all-powerful Edit, Fill, Content Aware, and click OK, and magically it's gone. In fact, to deselect, there are several different ways. I can click away to deselect. I can also choose Select, Reselect if for some reason I wanted that selection back. And I can choose Select, Deselect. Finally, I'll reselect one more time and use my shortcut because that's the way I roll. Control D or Command D will deselect. And that's easy to remember because the word deselect starts with D, so it's a good mnemonic device. The next selection I want to make is I want to pop up some little bubbles of penguins here. Imagine you're creating a silly advertisement. So I'm going to open Penguin 2, and I'll get ready and double-click and open Penguin 1 from Mini Bridge. I'll double-click to collapse Mini Bridge and hit Command 0 or Control 0 to fit in window. Now, as with any tool in Photoshop, every tool, with the exception of the Move tool and the Zoom tool, have nested or hidden tools underneath. You can click and hold and count to 2 to see those tools, or you can right-click. I'm going to switch to the elliptical marquee tool. And I find when most people first try to make an elliptical selection, they start in the wrong spot. If you want to start with the penguin's head, a lot of people will go roughly to the middle and then drag. But you need to imagine as if this circle had an upper left corner. That is the position where you start. Since I let go, I could easily get in the middle and drag to a new spot, but I cut off the beak. So one click outside of any selection area deselects. And I'm going to imagine a corner to a larger circle way up here. So I will click and drag, and there I did a much better job of selecting the penguin's head. If I don't want to include the purse that's in the background, I can simply use my left arrow key and down arrow keys to nudge this until I'm happy with it. I often don't drag to nudge in position because, quite frankly, I have too much caffeine and it might be a little shaky. Nudging can be done individually with your up arrow, down arrow, left and right arrow keys, or a power user trick to make bigger nudges, hold down your Shift key and hit your up and down, right and left arrows. That was with the Shift key. Without, there we go. And I'm going to choose Edit Copy. I'll go to the Tribeca image, Edit, Paste. And now this penguin is on its own layer. And to have good Photoshop habits, I'll name this Penguin 1. When you name a layer, it is important to double-click in the middle of the name. Don't aim for the right, because that may bring up layer style, or the left, the thumbnail. That will also bring up layer style. Aim for dead center of the layer name. Now I'll go back to Penguin 2, hit Control 0 or Command 0 to fit in window. And this time, I'll use a different trick. If I'm more comfortable estimating the center of an object I'd like to select, on both the elliptical and the rectangular marquee tool, you can hold down Alt or Option and click and drag to go from center out. In this case, I'm cutting it a little bit off the photo, so I'll let go of my mouse, then let go of Alt or Option, and nudge it over with my arrow keys or up with my arrow keys. Or I could simply start over. I'll go further up to the left, click and drag to make a selection from upper left, Or estimate a different center point and hold down Alt or Option and drag from the center out. Let go, and I can move this into a better position. Edit, copy, come over to my Tribeca image, edit, paste. And to move the penguin, I need to switch to my Move tool because that penguin is now on their own layer. I'll double-click in the middle of layer 1 and name it Penguin 2. I'll click back on Penguin 1 and move this guy to the upper left. Now in both cases, I didn't attempt to keep a perfect circle. Let me show you that. I'll come back to Penguin 1. I'll go to my elliptical marquee tool and click away to deselect. And this time I'll hold down Shift to keep a perfect circle, letting go of my mouse first, then my Shift key. And before I copy this one, I'm going to go to Image, Image Size, and make this smaller. I'll make the width 2 inches. Then I'll make my selection with the Shift key. Perfect. Edit, copy, click on the Tribeca image, edit, paste. And I'm going to paste several times. They're all landing directly on top of one another. So if I switch to the Move tool, I can move the first one and name this Tiny Bird. I'll click the next layer, move that, and name it Tiny Bird, leaving the numbers that Photoshop automatically gave me. And finally, click on this layer, move this guy, and it'll be our first tiny bird. To finish up, I'm going to select all the layers. So I'll click once on the first penguin layer, Shift-click on the last penguin layer, and if I want to move them as a unit, I can actually just use my arrow keys on my keyboard to nudge them. I hope you've enjoyed this tour of the rectangular selection tool, the elliptical selection tool, and the tips along with those tools. Remember, Shift keeps a perfect square or perfect circle. Once you've let go of a selection, your arrow keys will nudge up, down, left, and right. Shift and your arrow keys will nudge in larger increments, 10 pixels at a time instead of 1 pixel at a time. And my favorite deselect shortcut is Control-D or Command-D. In this image, we're going to do a little color correction using the lasso tool and create a more compelling background. We'll also introduce the polygon lasso tool or polygonal lasso tool, depending on your preference for pronunciation. We'll start by going to the regular lasso tool, and I'm going to zoom into this shot with Command plus or Control plus. You can also use View Zoom In. I'll make a rough selection of the baby's forehead because she's got a little bit of red there, and it's hard to know whether that red is just a reflection of the top that she's wearing or she might have some rosacea. If I were to make a straight color correction, I would see a seam between the skin tone and where I'm attempting to remove the red. Let's see that. Under Image, Adjustments, Color Balance, I can move a little bit away from red and a little bit away from magenta and turn Preview off and on. In fact, I need to move away from magenta, not towards magenta, to remove that red. And turn Preview off and on. And if I were to click OK and click once to deselect, I can see a clear line, evidence that I've done correction. So I'm going to step backward twice. Or you can make a new selection by clicking away and drawing a new area. You'll notice that I'm being very loose about this selection because we are going to use feathering. Feathering will blur the edge so that there's no evidence of the work that you've done. I'll choose Select, Modify, Feather. I'll type in a large number like 25 and click OK. The number will vary depending on the resolution of the image. Now I'll do the same process. Image, Adjustments, Color Balance. Move a little bit away from red and a little bit away from magenta. I could do the same in the highlights also. A little bit away from red and a little bit away from magenta. And when I click OK and click once outside the selection to deselect, it's a smooth blend. You see no evidence of my work. In fact, I often use History over at the top right to click once and see before and after. Much better. I'll click History again to collapse it, and I'll hit Command 0 or Control 0 to fit in window. Now looking at this original shot, I'll hit the eye icon to hide the black layer that I created. This was the original dimension of the photo. But to make it more interesting, I'm applying the rule of thirds. If I click the crop tool and click once just anywhere on the photo, you could see I'm aiming to get her face in a PowerPoint where these two grid lines intersect, making it a more compelling photo. Digital cameras, or cameras in general, usually have a lens that has a rectangular frame, and you have three fields of view: your horizontal, your vertical, and your diagonal. With the field of view, I want to call the eye to the interesting part of the photo, the subject being the baby. So I'm going to go back to my Move tool, and I won't crop the image. I only brought that up to show the rule of thirds. I want to drop in this background, but on the background I've got a bar running through it. So let's see if we can use the Polygon Lasso tool to remove that bar. With the Polygon Lasso tool, I'm going to click once to start, and I'm not holding down the mouse. Look, Ma, no hands. As I move up, Photoshop will connect the dots with each single click. No holding down required. And I'm making a very rough selection, leaving a little bit to chance or a little bit of a border outside the image. Coming all the way down here might cut off a little bit of the bar, so I'm going to leave a little background in so that Photoshop will do a better job. And if you get back to the point where you started, you'll see a circle indicating Photoshop will close this polygon selection with one click. It may be difficult to get exactly to the point where you started, so if you can't hit that exact spot, a double click will also close your selection. But with any selection, you always want to work back to the point where you started so that Photoshop doesn't decide how to close it for you and chop off part of the image. So just attempt to get very close, double click will close. Now we'll use the all-powerful Edit, Fill, leave it on Content Aware, leave it on Normal, and click OK. And it did a beautiful job. In fact, most of the child will cover up this. If you don't like it, just choose Edit, Fill again, Content Aware again, and it will regenerate a new pattern. But I'm happy with this. And instead of clicking away to deselect, that's going to start a new selection. Very big note on this tool. Escape on your keyboard will cancel that. Or if you start a new selection and you don't want it, double click will close. And it's safer to use Select, Deselect, or Control D on Windows, Command D on the Mac. Now I will do Select All, Control A or Command A, copy, click on the baby photo one more time, and choose Edit, Paste, or Control V. This is a little bit off-center, but that's okay. I'm going to take my Move tool and move this over because I have the black there. I'll name this layer Background. hit Return or Enter and drag it underneath the baby. Now, let's do a little blending of the two. I'll click on Baby, and I'll go back to my regular lasso tool. I'll make a very rough selection around the baby, and I messed up there, but I'm going to let it go. As long as you don't let your mouse go, you'll be good when it comes to making rough lasso selections. I can actually use Subtract from Selection at the top and click and drag in a circular motion, being very careful to close where I started. And now that selection is cleaned up. If I find it's too close to the baby's arm, I'll choose Add to Selection and again make a circular close back to where I started. You can be very rough about it inside the selection area because you only need to be careful where you want to make a new edge, and I always finish in a circular motion. Again, I'm going to use the feather. Select, Modify, Feather. And this time I'll use a bigger number, 35. I'll click OK, and all I need to do, since this baby is on its own layer, go to the bottom of the Layers panel and click once on Add Layer Mask, and I've done a beautiful blend. And here you can really see how that blending happened. In fact, if you master layer and layer masks, I could paint a little bit more of that ear and the person in the background away. This technique is one I use very often to make more interesting shots out of a photo that I already love. Often that photo may have something distracting in the background. Now, whenever I'm out and about with my camera, I'm always looking for surfaces that would make new, interesting backgrounds to drop into a shot of a subject that I really like. Hopefully you'll review this on your own and master this technique of dropping in new backgrounds using the lasso tool or making selections with the polygon or polygonal lasso tool. The Magic Wand tool has been a staple for making precise selections in Photoshop since version 1.0. Let's see why. The Magic Wand is located underneath the Quick Selection tool. Quick Selection was added a few versions ago. Magic Wand makes color-based selections using a tolerance. And you'll see the default value in the options bar across the top of the screen. Tolerance goes from 0 to 255 based on RGB color levels. 255 would be select everything, 0 would be select nothing. So really you would have at least a 1 to select one tone or one range of color. At 32, one quick click selects 32 color levels that are close to one another in this sky. To select more, I will go to my Select menu and choose Grow. And notice it grabbed the rest of the sky except for non-adjacent or non-touching pixels. So I'll undo that. If I were to lower the tolerance to something like 5 and choose Select Grow, it doesn't grab nearly as much. So tolerance is tied directly to that grow function. Also, I may want to grab the other parts of blue in between that are not touching. So I can choose Select Similar. I still had the number 5 in there, so it didn't grab as much. So I'll undo again, and this time increase the tolerance to 20. And choose Select Similar. Now I got most of what I want, and a quick way to just grab this corner is to change the mode from creating a new selection to Add to Selection. When I click Add to Selection on the options bar, I can just click once in this corner and it grows. You can use, instead of changing from New Selection to Add to Selection, I could undo that and just use my Shift key. The power users love the Shift key to add to a selection, or Alt or Option to take away. Holding down Alt or Option and clicking subtracted, holding down Shift and clicking Adds. And it always gives you a slightly different selection depending on where you click, a darker blue or a lighter blue. But for those of you who are brand new, switching to Add to Selection may be the easiest way instead of having to memorize keyboard shortcuts. Now let's do something with the selection that we have. I want the structure selected, so I will choose Select Inverse to grab the opposite. Then I'll copy, Edit Copy, and I'll click on this building image behind and choose Edit Paste. Once I've pasted, I can grab my Move tool because Photoshop automatically created a new layer for me. And just to be a good Photoshop user, I'm going to name this layer Structure. I double-clicked to give it a name. And then I'll simply drag and drop down so it looks like we have two buildings in this shot. Now the perfectionist in me wants to color correct this to look closer to that one, but our goal with this video is just to show you the Magic Wand tool. In fact, I'll hide this structure layer and I'll click on the background layer so I can show you another setting on the Magic Wand tool. With the Magic Wand, if you know instantly that you want to grab non-adjacent or non-touching colors, you can uncheck Contiguous. If I click on the sky, it grabs 20 color levels within one another. If I deselect, select, deselect, or you can use Command D on the Mac, Control D on Windows, and uncheck Contiguous, now when I click once, it may grab, depending on your tolerance, blues peeking through the tower. It's difficult to see, but it did grab more than last time. If I zoom in with Control plus or Command plus a few times and look at the very tip top of this, there was actually a railing and a ladder where it grabbed the blues that were the same as the spot I clicked on in between the ladder and the railing. In fact, I'm going to do a much higher tolerance, and I don't really want any more inside the tower, so I will check Contiguous back on, and I will up the tolerance to 50, and I'm still on Add to Selection, which is a good safe mode to stay on if you're going to be selecting a lot of area. I'll click once, and now I've got it virtually perfect, just the corner. Click once, and now the sky is all selected. A good reason to select the sky is maybe you have an image with a flat sky, but the foreground looks great. You could find shots of skies that are compelling and nice and blue and copy and paste them into that photo where your sky was a bit flat. So that's a popular use for the Magic Wand tool, to grab a sky or a background that you want to pop into another photo. All right, you've seen how to use the Magic Wand to select images based on their color values. You've seen how to use Grow and Similar and how they're tied to the tolerance setting in the options bar when you're on the Magic Wand tool. The key to mastering this tool is practice, 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 and use a wide variety of images. And since we're discussing wands, I can't help but quote Harry Potter. Let's make those backgrounds disappear or copy them using Evanesco. Now it's time for my absolute favorite selection tool, the Quick Selection tool. The Quick Selection tool is located below the Lasso tool, and one click will activate it. The way I'm going to use this tool is that the Quick Selection tool will paint in selection areas. I'll click and start dragging, and without getting anywhere near this cable or this building, Photoshop magically found the selection area for me. In fact, that's a key to making this tool work. Do not try to be very close to the edge of the object you want to select. Stay a few pixels inside. So a small click and drag here added more to that selection. And I'm going to let this cable stay in the selection. My goal with this image is I had a shot where I love the richness of this color in this building and the shade of the blue and the clarity of this sign, but my sky was completely washed out. If I hit the eye icon next to the top layer in this image, this is the original sky captured and seen by my camera. But in correcting for the rest of the photo, it gets washed out or wiped out. So all I did was take the original, darken it, save a version, correct the rest of the photo until it looked perfect and save a version, and then make them 2 layers on top of one another in Photoshop. So with quick selection, I've got the top portion of the sky selected, and now I'm going to grab the bottom. If you ever find that it's grabbing too much, we'll zoom in with Command plus or Control plus. There's a satellite dish here and a little bit of a building where it grabbed too much. So I'll undo that selection. The quick selection tool has no tolerance setting. It uses brush size in order to make your selections more accurate. So if I wheel down a little bit so I can see the area I want to select, I can come up to the options bar and dial my brush size down. I'll shoot for around 9 pixels. And the safest way to get one of these panels to disappear is click in the dark gray area here. That way you don't make a mark on the image. It's just a safety spot that I use. Now as I click and drag, staying completely inside, the satellite dish is very close to the sky background, so it got selected, but the darker building was protected. And I'm okay with this. I'm going to be blending in layers anyway. Now for this tiny little area, I do not want the circle to cross in the dark gray of the sign. I want it only to touch what is sky. And here sometimes I'll just do quick clicks to include a little more. And then click and drag here, staying well in the center. Photoshop found the edges for me. I'm just using my wheel on my mouse to wheel up or down. This brush is way too big, so instead of dialing it down up here on my keyboard, I'm going to use the left bracket key. That is next to the letter P on your keyboard. Immediately to the right of the P is your left bracket and right bracket on most keyboards. The key also has the curly brace on it. And now I'll drag down a bit to include this part of the sky. And I'll do View, Fit on Screen, to make sure I didn't miss anything. Okay, here comes the magic. The sky is selected, but ultimately I want that to be cut away and I want the buildings and the sign to be protected. So I'm going to select the inverse or the opposite, telling Photoshop to keep this. That's a popular trick. Grab the most solid area to make your selection and then narrow it down to what you really want to keep by selecting the inverse or the opposite. Once I've selected the inverse to protect this area, I'll go to the bottom of my Layers panel and hit the Add Layer Mask button. And this original sky that was captured in my original shot is magically added. A great way to see before and after is a layer mask trick. You can hold down just your Shift key and click on the black and white layer mask thumbnail. Shift click disables the mask. Shift click again turns it back on. Shift click, Shift click. And now I've got a much more compelling, interesting overall shot. There are many other things you could do. You could color correct and lighten the sky a bit more. You could paint with blending. But my goal with this exercise was just to introduce painting with the quick selection tool. Try this with some images of your own and keep in mind the secret to this tool. If I hide this layer and click on the dark layer and I wanted to select it, select the dark sign just by clicking and dragging and not getting too close to the edge. Click and drag down and I got a bit too much, but I could always subtract and clean that up. Often this tool does a much better job subtracting than it does on your initial click and drag. So there I have a great quick selection of the darker version of the sign. Once you master this tool, you'll find your selection time can be cut in half. I use this tool 90% of the time to make precise selections. I hope you enjoy and learn to love this tool as much as I do.